3 kids have been
I was
driving
gonna
me.
be at the subcommittee, but I got stuck.
You sent me that.
Interstate shooting, I didn't go.
We were just talking about the interstate shooting and the fact that, like, I don't think anybody knows whether it really happened or not. Like,
It did happen. It
okay,
was in the
did they
traffic.
find shell casings? Like, I heard like they were out there trying to find shell casings.
Evidence, which was
But yeah, the traffic got like jammed up. Like, the news crew came late. What did you need me?
Pardon me, excuse me.
They are going to actually clarify the square footage changes.
We might have more square footage than we had.
Is that a big deal? Bragging points or want some clarity on how much square footage you've got?
You got plenty?
Respected by
Yes, sir.
I'm a diabetic. I feel it major.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the November meeting of the Germantown Planning Commission. Appreciate everyone coming out tonight. If we could have the roll call, please.
Mr. Bacon?
Here.
Mr. Saunders?
Here.
Mr. Marsh?
Here.
Mr. Hernandez?
here.
Alderman Owens?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Chairman Harless?
Here.
Mayor Palazzolo?
Here.
And we have a quorum for tonight's meeting. We have copies of the agenda. There have been some modifications made to the agenda tonight. First of all, if you'd like a copy, if you don't have a copy of the agenda, they're on the two podiums up front, I believe. And we have a couple of items that will be going on the consent agenda. And then after that, we'll be starting with item C, then going to A, then B. Do we have approval of the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Yes.
Mr. Saunders?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Chairman Harless?
Abstain.
Mayor Palazzolo?
Abstain.
And the minutes from the last meeting are approved. Since we have a couple of items on the agenda tonight, at the executive session this evening, the following items were placed on the consent agenda. This was items D and E. As part of the consent agenda, these items will not be presented, discussed, or voted upon individually. If anyone would like to hear either one of these items discussed before the Planning Commission this evening, please come forward at this time.
Mr. Chairman, would you just read for the record what those items are?
Certainly. Item D, this is case number 19-933, 7254 Neshoba Road. This is regarding a cell tower. The location is 7254 Neshoba Road. The property owner is David Smith, represented by the law offices of Baker Donaldson. And this is a cell tower that would go inside an existing transmission tower owned by Memphis Light, Gas, and Water. The second item is item E, and it's case number 19-941, Westmead Plan Development. The location is 2065 Flowers Oak Cove. The property owner is Matthew Gill, represented by Salmito Land Planning. And what their request is approval of a revised final plat for tree preservation encroachment area to put a what do we want to call it? Tree house, to put a tree house on a tree. Thank you. So those are the two items that are going to consent agenda. Since we have no one coming forward, I'd like to.
You do, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon me.
No, that's all right. I'm pretty inconspicuous, so I'll let it pass. I got the first notification to appear for the cell tower recently. It's my understanding. Go ahead. Oh, okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry.
Are you wanting to have a discussion on this item?
Yes, just briefly.
Okay. So we will pull.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you. We will pull item D from the consent agenda, and the only item now before the on the consent agenda is item E. Is there anyone wishing to discuss item E? If not, then seeing no one come forward on item E, I'd like to note that all matters concerning the consent agenda, the vote for each member of the Planning Commission will constitute an acknowledgement that the member has read the application or proposal, the staff reports, and the subcommittee reports. I'm prepared for a motion for approval on the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion? Second. And a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Yes.
Mr. Saunders?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Chairman Harless?
Yes.
Mayor Palazzolo?
Yes.
And the consent agenda is approved. We will now go to item E. It will be the first item on the agenda.
D.
D. I'm sorry. Thank you.
okay.
Do we have a staff report?
Okay, thank you. The first item for public hearing tonight is a cell tower located at 7254 Neshoba Road. As mentioned earlier, this would be going in an existing MLG&W transmission tower. The site is located here off of Neshoba Road. There is Riverdale School. And here is an aerial to give you an idea of exactly where the cell tower would be located. Right here is a transmission tower for MLG&W, and the cell tower would be located within that transmission tower. Well, we won't advance then. The cell tower will be located approximately 86 feet from Neshoba Road. It will have an equipment enclosure that will be located behind the cell tower right here. As part of the approval, the Planning Commission has requested that any road improvements along Neshoba Road be waived, since this site is already existing as is, as a utility site, and it's just adding another utility to it. No road improvements will be required for this. The cell tower requires 2 waivers from the city's wireless transmission facility ordinance, section 23-86H. Specifically, the location of the tower is said to be its height plus 10 feet from a property line. It is somewhat less than that due to its existing location, due to the existing location of the transmission tower. That will dictate where the cell tower is. Additionally, the ordinance calls for a landscape buffer along the perimeter of the property, 50-foot landscape buffer. This is not permitted per MLG&W. MLG&W has specific landscaping guidelines. Therefore, as discussed at executive session, a waiver would be granted for both of these requirements from the ordinance. This use was permitted per the Board of Zoning Appeals on August 13th, 2019. That was a public noticed hearing, and the Board of Zoning Appeals approved the use on this site for a cell tower. If approved, it will advance to the Design Review Commission for approval and then to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. The applicant's representative is here for any questions.
Commissioners, any questions of staff? Would the applicant like to make a presentation? If you will, state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, C.C. Drayton, Baker Donaldson, 165 Madison Avenue, Memphis, Tennessee, here on behalf of Verizon Wireless. We certainly appreciate the Planning Commission hearing us tonight and considering this application for approval of the preliminary and final site plan. As Sarah stated, this particular cell tower is slated to go into an existing MLGW transmission tower. We were here back in, I think, June of last year, looking at another site within Forgy Park, and we were asked to consider an alternate location based on the concern about being close to a park. So Verizon did do their due diligence, and they've determined that this is the best alternate location. One of the things that Verizon is simply trying to do is just improve coverage. There's Riverdale Park, there's Forgy Park, there's Riverdale School, so they want to improve coverage for the residents of this area. They also want to enhance the 911 services in this area as well, as we all know that that's a core concern. The tower, as you see, is going to be a monopole tower within the existing transmission tower. The equipment compound is located behind the tower, as we were asked to revise the location by the BZA. So we feel like we've done everything that we've been asked to do, and we're just seeking approval. Okay.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions of the applicant?
Thank you.
No questions? Do we have a motion?
You want to hear from you?
I'm sorry. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal? Please come forward. I see you this time.
I don't know that it's
If you
direct
will, please
opposition.
state your name
Oh,
and-
I'm sorry. My name's Alan Webb. I live at 1619 Fireside Cove, which was just off of that prior graphic. So, yeah, apologies. This was the first kind of piece of mail I got recently was about this meeting. We're relatively new to the area. And I was just trying to understand. These are very helpful to put together, and I'm taking a glance now that I can see it a bit better. It's difficult to kind of read some of the writing. So there's no alternative place to put it that's not directly in the road right there. I mean, the transmission towers are admittedly hideous, but adding to that, you can't buffer it back a bit further. The variances are necessary. You can't get it away from the houses that are sitting there a bit more.
Just to comment, the
Sorry,
transmission.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the beam, the steel beam, whatever that is. I assume that's there as new support for the tower.
The transmission tower is already there.
Yes, I understand
And the cell
that.
tower is a monolithic pole inside the transmission tower.
I understand. So but it will be new, right?
Yes, there is
Okay.
nothing inside the transmission tower at the present time.
Okay, and the variance was granted for that new structure that will be going up just within the confines of the existing.
That's correct.
Okay, so I understand, but that couldn't be placed anywhere else.
It was actually moved from near Fogarty Park to
Okay.
this site, and this was the best site. We've got a dead area for Verizon for cell phone coverage.
Yeah, we're customers, we know. Yeah.
So I think that answers.
Okay, is there any audio from this? I've noticed that with some of the cell towers, you get significant buzzing, and is there going to be any of that with the cell tower? Does it emit, it's my notice. Does it emit any noise?
I'm going to direct this question to our Mr. Ross, who's Community Development Director.
My only point that I wanted to add to the record is there was no variance given for this. That this was a use on field by the board of zoning appeals. The location of this was determined by the location of the transmission towers. That's how the request is traveled to the planning commission. In terms of whether there's any noise emitted from this monopole and the antennas at the top of it, according to the applicant, there will be noise emitted.
Okay. There's no measurable change. I mean, besides sight, that'd be the number one thing I'd think about. Sure. We are. I would disagree with you. I think it's noticeable. It is a large pole, and you're adding to the existing beauty that's on that property, I'll say a bit tongue-in-cheek. And I'm a little concerned that we're just going to start adding things to these properties as they're available because people don't want them in other places. I want to voice that. I think that the cell tower will get some coverage. It's obviously already been through the processes that it needs to. I'm a little concerned that you're just going to keep adding things to these right-of-ways that exist, assuming that the homeowners around there go, all right, we live near cell towers, let's go ahead and put some more junk there. Just want to voice that.
Anything else, Mr. Webb?
For clarity
Yeah.
as well, from any noise that may be emitted from this.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your time tonight and you removing this from the consent agenda.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in opposition to this project? If not, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, the Subdivision Site Plan Review Committee met on October 23rd, 2019, and recommended that the application be placed on the next Planning Commission agenda for action, subject to the subcommittee discussion, comments in the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application. This evening, the proposed motion is the approval of a 127-foot tall wireless transmission facility cell tower located within the MLGW transmission tower at 7254 Neshoba Road, subject to the comments and conditions listed above and the plans and documents submitted with the application.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Commissioners, are there any questions? Any comments? If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting to approve, and I'd just like to say I think this is an excellent example of what's called co-location of towers. Instead of having a tower standalone in another location, adding it to an MLGW tower like this, I think is a great alternative, so I'm voting to approve.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, I too will vote for it as well. Like Mr. Bacon said, the co-location, and not only that, but just working with staff and the Planning Commission to move it from Fogarty Park into something like this is much more appeasing. So I'm voting yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Also in favor, yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Mr. Saunders?
Yes, based on comments prior by commissioners.
Chairman Harless?
And I also vote yes.
Mayor Palazzolo?
I vote yes as well, and I echo those comments. The co-location is key when we have public utilities in our right-of-ways. What a better site to be able to put this type of device. You know, our city has roughly, I think, a little over half of our residents have abandoned landlines many years ago, and this has become really a public safety issue as they try to reach 911 or other emergency providers. Having cell coverage is pretty much the new norm. If you don't have it, that ambulance or that police cruiser does not get to your neighborhood. So I welcome this, and Mr. Drayton, we hope that you would bring more applications in these type of locations. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the next item on the agenda. This is item C. This is regarding Baptist Specialty Hospital.
Mr. Chairman, before we begin, I have the prospective tenant of this project is a competitor and colleague of my employer, so therefore I'll recuse myself from this agenda item.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, thank you. So the project before you is Baptist Rehabilitation Hospital. It is located on Exeter Road, as you see here from this aerial photo. It was originally built as a hospital in 1985 with an addition of a physician's office building added. There have been expansions in 87 and 93. And then as of 1993, it's the site layout you see before you, 117,300 square foot building with both hospital and physicians buildings and 345 parking spaces. The zoning, the underlying zoning under which the property was developed is C2, general commercial, and SC1, shopping center. That is the zoning that this project is being analyzed under. Since it's not redeveloping completely, it will not be using the T5 overlay. There is also a treed area here, back here, per previous landscape plans for the hospital and expansions. It showed this tree area as to not be disturbed. However, the tree area was never shown on the site plans, nor were specific dimensions ever given. The project before you is to expand a row of parking in here, and then also add a parking deck. The only additions to the building would be on the second story, about 1,000 square feet right there. This new parking would accommodate the existing facility to use it more as medical offices. The hospital use would cease. There would be an outpatient surgery center component, but there would no longer be an overnight hospital use. In order to accommodate additional medical offices, 472 parking spaces would be required. They are going to provide 481 parking spaces. This item was heard before the Planning Commission last month in October, and there was concern from the neighbors about the tree area and whether or not this remaining area, which you see in black, the black dots here, whether that would remain undeveloped. The applicant has since worked with the neighbors, had neighborhood meetings, and also been in contact with the neighbors via email and phone. The developer has agreed to place a tree buffer deed restriction on the property for this area. And I'll go back to the site plan so you can see the area that's in green would remain undeveloped as part of a deed restriction that would be recorded at the time of construction plan review for the site. If the Planning Commission approves this project, it would advance to the Design Review Commission for the tree plan and tree mitigation, as well as the revised site plan. The applicant has expressed that they would like to bring the site back at a later date to the Design Review Commission for exterior improvements to the existing building, paint, and facade upgrades, as well as a landscape refresh. The applicant is here for any questions.
Commissioners, do we have questions of staff? If not, would the applicant like to make a presentation? Gentlemen, if you'll state your name and address for the record, please.
Joe Fogarty, Healthcare Realty, 3310 West End Avenue, Nashville, Tennessee. No real presentation, just want to say thanks. We've been busy since we were here last, and appreciate the staff support and some of the neighbors here. We've worked a lot with them over the last month, and we'll welcome any questions that you'll have about that process.
Questions of the applicant, commissioners? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project? Please come forward. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Please come forward. Yes, sir, if you'll just come right up to the podium. And if you'll give us your name and address, please, sir.
Yes, my name is Ronald Boyd. I live at 2105 Sonning. And this area here is not a flat terrain, it's a hill. There really isn't a wall that could be built high enough to prevent, my concern is a view from that area straight into the houses on Sonning. So with a parking deck, anyone could just park there at any point in time in any hour of the day or night and be able to stare directly into the backyards of our neighborhood. And I suppose that's all. That's my main concern, is the safety issue. My grandmother, a long time ago, she stayed at this hospital. They had windows in the back. So I've seen the backyard view from inside the hospital. And you can see everything, every neighbor there. So having an opened, parking deck where somebody could just be there, and you can't really, they have every right to be there, Me and several neighbors, that is a concern of ours, is the safety angle. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fogarty, would you like to address that? I know you've got some landscape plans for this area.
Correct. We don't need to get too far into the details of the sections. We walked when we had our neighborhood meeting. We used some tape and some visual cues to sort of indicate the elevation of the deck. And I think it was helpful for those who attended to see that the top of this deck is essentially the same elevation as the Trader Joe's parking lot, the service drive. And so we feel we've studied a lot the elevation. David could comment specifically regarding how that relates to, I think, the nearest home, but I believe the the parking deck is like 3 feet. Why don't you comment on the elevation?
Mr. Smith, if you'd state your name.
David Smith, 1316 Riverwind Cove, not Neshoba. That's another David Smith from the previous item. I don't have a cell tower. The parking deck is planned to be about elevation 347, and as you just follow one of those lines generally to the east, the hill that was referenced, it is there, and the hill is about elevation 360. So if you were standing on that parking deck and looked due east, you would not be able to see into the houses because the hill is taller than what the deck would be.
And is there current landscaping or additional landscaping going in there?
Currently, it is heavily wooded, but the plan that we are proposing to submit to the Design Review Commission includes a screening line along the eastern side of the ramp to get up to the parking deck to act as a visual barrier to enhance whatever is there, but it would be a fairly continuous screen between the parking deck and the non-developed area to the east of the parking deck.
I know there's existing landscaping there, but it's gotten a little old, so you're going to upgrade it and
Yes, sir. The
make it a little robust.
existing landscaping that is there around the southern parking area will be removed as part of expanding the parking, and then we'll be putting a screening, organic screening out of trees and holly bushes and cedar trees along the eastern extent of what we're proposing to develop. So the developed edge will then have a screen along it from where the existing wall is to the north, wrapping all the way around the south with the adjacent commercial properties. So we'll have a fairly continuous screen along the eastern side.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
if
Mayor.
I could ask the applicant, so is the parking deck going to be 24/7 use or restricted use during a set of hours or determined yet?
Undetermined at this point. Right now, it's envisioned to be 24/7, but it will be signed and utilized and enforced to be employees only of the facility.
Will it be secured with some kind of arm or fob access
I
or?
think that's a consideration for the future. We'd like to have the opportunity to just address that. There's been some concern expressed by neighbors and staff regarding Trader Joe's parking there. We believe that it being up on the deck is less convenient than those surface stalls surrounding. So we don't believe it's going to be sought out, but if it is, then we would explore things like the arm.
The Planning Commission doesn't have purview over landscape, but it looks like, in my opinion, the front landscaping is a little bit tired, and I heard in the presentation that when you come back, that you're looking at a comprehensive landscaping plan and get it up to the standards that we're used to in Germantown.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Yes, sir.
Barry Wall, 2075 signing. It's not so much an opposition. I just want to be sure that I understood that this buffer zone will now be the boundaries well defined, as opposed to they've always been a boundary zone and allegedly never had specific dimensions. Does this deed restriction now have very specific dimensions?
Sarah, would you like to comment on that, or Mr. Smith?
When the final document is prepared and filed, which would be required by the city before we do anything, there will be an actual legal description with distances, bearings tied to property corners so that anyone in the future could reproduce the boundary limits of the non-disturbed or non-developed area.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, I have a question real quick. Like, looking at that particular site plan there, the green area was the intended or proposed buffer area. So you're looking at basically putting that buffer from the property line of the residential all the way over to the parking that's being proposed now. All that would remain as a buffer zone, and it would be recorded so that it would always be there. Is that our understanding?
That is correct. The distance from the developed edge to the edge of the green line is about 15 feet. In some places it's 20 feet. It varies depending on where you are, but yes, anything in green would be the non-developed, deed restricted area.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I had one more follow-up,
Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, for the applicant. When I walked the property a couple weeks ago, there's a collection of either brick wall or fencing back there. I couldn't determine if the fencing was the property, your ownership, or if it were existing homes, privacy fences. Were there any plans to do any fencing back there or walls or that type of thing?
I believe the fences that you're referring to are some of the neighbors that abut our property. On the exhibit here, we've done our best to express this knowing we're still subject to DRC review
Sure.
and approval. But the line coming from the existing above-grade brick wall on the north side of the property, as you see coming down in various colors, it's going to take the shape of an above-grade wall. It'll flip to a retaining wall as the grade demands. But as safety would require, as code would require, there'll be a railing on top of that retaining wall. And the biggest feedback we've got from a lot of the neighbors is regarding holly bushes as a additional barrier to pedestrian activity. And so what we'll be submitting to DRC will include that as well.
Thank you, and I know staff will follow up with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, the Site Plan and Subdivision Subcommittee met on October 23rd, 2019, and recommended that the application be placed on the next Planning Commission agenda for action, subject to the subcommittee's discussion, comments, and the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application. The subcommittee also requested that the applicants meet with the neighbors, which they have done. Tonight's proposed motion is the approval of a revised final site plan for medical offices in a building previously used as a hospital at Baptist Specialty Hospital, 2100 and 2120 Exeter Road, resulting in a 118,383 square foot medical facility with 481 parking spaces, subject to the comments and conditions listed above and the plans and documents submitted with the application.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions, commissioners? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting to approve. I'd just like to applaud first and foremost, the neighbors for becoming a part of the process. Clearly, it had an effect on the ultimate result of the application. I'd also like to applaud Healthcare Realty and Mr. Fogarty for working with the neighbors. And I'd just like to say, I think most importantly, there were a lot of give and takes with this application, but the placing the deed restriction on what's probably one of the largest landscape or tree buffers in Germantown is quite notable. So I'm voting to approve.
Mr. Clark?
Well, Mr. Bacon stole all my thunder. I couldn't have said it any better myself. The only thing I would add is, like the mayor said earlier, about upgrading the entire site when you do the rest of it. Other than that, I agree with Mr. Bacon, and we'll be voting yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Like the others, I echo those thoughts. I attended the public meeting, the subsequent meeting, and just commend all the extra efforts that you guys went to in terms of trying to mark the elevations, and really went to great lengths to help the neighbors and the community understand what you were going to be doing and how it was going to affect their properties and so forth. And I think also some of the specific changes that you made from the original application in terms of buffers and other things, some of the extra landscaping and all. So obviously commendations for that. And again, to the neighbors who took the time and effort to be engaged in the process. And I think ultimately we ended up with a much better end result and for everyone. So I'm voting yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yeah, we said this in executive session. I think last month we sat here and praised the developers working on the Fulmer property for their cooperation and how extended they had become to the neighbors. And I think we've seen the same thing here, the neighbors working with the developer and the developer working with the neighbors. That's exactly what we want to see as a planning commission. I mean, we're not going to agree on everything all the time, but some of the concessions that you made, that deed restriction is huge in my opinion. That settles this once and for all. There will be no more encroachment for our neighbors along Sonning, and I think they appreciate that. I know I do, and so I vote yes.
Mr. Saunders?
think just about everything's been said that could be said, so I'm going to be voting yes for this.
Chairman Harless.
I also echo the comments of the fellow commissioners. This is the way the system is supposed to work, where everyone comes together and communicates. And so I think we all see the results. I vote yes.
Mayor Palazzolo.
Thank you, and we appreciate you investing in rehabbing this property, so to speak. Thank you.
And the motion is approved. Good luck. We now move to the next item, which is the amendments to Chapter 23 zoning of the city's Code of Ordinances.
Mr. Chairman, prior to staff's presentation this evening, I'd just like to make a statement for the record. I am the applicant on this particular item in front of the Planning Commission this evening. As such, I do not intend to participate in any of the discussion or dialogue, but if this were to end in the event of a tie, when the vote is taken, I am prepared to make a vote if called upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Chairman Harless, members of the commission. This item is to amend portions of Chapter 23 of the city's Code of Ordinances related to zoning, specifically the Smart Code section of the zoning ordinance. As the mayor mentioned, this is an application filed at his request in response to the Resolution 19R08 as adopted by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen on August 12th. Just as a review, the resolution specifically requested that the Planning Commission consider amendments that would, 1, delete any provisions for new standalone single-use apartment developments in the Smart Code districts. 2, any new apartment development in the Smart Code zoning district should only be considered in vertically integrated mixed-use settings or as a component of an integrated mixed-use development appropriately designed and scaled to its surroundings. 3, establish smart growth design guidelines to minimize the impact on city services and create development projects that retain their value over time. And then 4, define standalone and single-use apartment developments. As part of this request within the resolution, staff was able to address items 1, 2, and 4 of the resolution with the amendments in front of you tonight. Specific sections that these issues are addressed are within the warrant section 23.745, the permitted use section 23.763, and definitions, which is 23.819. Going through each of those, starting with the warrants, in looking at this from a larger comprehensive perspective, it was the thought of staff that going back to the particular land use recommendations that were laid out in all of the small area plans, those are adopted by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and that if an applicant chooses to request a deviation from those land use recommendations that are within the small area plans that are generated from a bottom-up, a citizen-driven design process, the design workshops or charrettes that are conducted for each of these small areas, that a deviation from those should be considered as a warrant if someone wanted to, say, put a multifamily project where an office project was supposed to be in the land use plan, or a multifamily project in an area where a park was supposed to go. So regardless of the transect designations of the land use and the residential options that are allowed within those, staff felt that it would be in the best interest of the plan recommendations and the effort put forward by both the city and the citizens that participated in those processes to have any deviations from those considered as a warrant and brought forward to justify those by any applicants. So that was the reason for including this as a warrant item to deviate from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen adopted small area plan land use recommendations therein. Secondly, we looked at the definitions and considered other jurisdictions and how they define apartments versus how we look at apartments. And it was universal within other jurisdictions, both locally and nationally, that apartments are called multifamily. That is an industry-specific term. And so moving from the word apartment to the word multifamily was the first step. So there was a deletion in accessory dwelling unit to delete the word apartment and add the word dwelling unit. The definition for apartment building, which is a specific residential type within the use table, which we'll get to in just a moment, was deleted, but it did read previously a rear yard residential building type accommodating multiple for sale or rental dwelling above and beside each other, sharing a common entry, access directly and facing the street. So it was still for sale or rental, but colloquially here, apartments mean something different. So to address that issue, we moved forward with redefining this as multifamily buildings. So the next definition that I'll talk about is the multifamily building type. And so we created an overall definition for a multifamily building, which is a building with 3 or more housing units for sale or rental that share 1 or more common walls. This multifamily building definition aligns with the multifamily dwelling definition that is in the non-smart code portion of the zoning ordinance that also identifies it as a building with 3 or more housing units for sale or rental. We further created sub-definitions of this multifamily building residential use type to have 2, both a mixed use, which is defined as a building with 3 or more housing units in a vertically integrated mixed-use setting. The ideal model consists of a building with retail, office, or restaurant uses on the ground floor and residential uses on the upper floors. So this sets it apart and follows similar language that was put forward in the Board of Mayor and Aldermen's resolution. The second sub-definition of a multifamily building residential type is the multifamily building single use, which is a building with 3 or more housing units built as a component of an integrated mixed-use development appropriately designed and scaled to its surroundings. Again, we took our language cues from the language that was adopted in the Board of Mayor and Aldermen resolution. And then finally, we assembled a definition for multifamily development, standalone single use. And this is a building or a group of buildings with 3 or more housing units that share 1 or more common walls and that is built solely for residential purposes. So again, this is a development that is a standalone single use for a multifamily product that is built solely for residential purposes, and not multifamily product, but multifamily development project. We then took a look at the use table, and I'm hoping with our new technology in the council chambers tonight, this will be a little bit clearer, but it is still small type. But we took the word apartment building within the residential use types on the permitted use table, and we struck it. Previously, it was allowed by right, so permitted by right, so a filled-in box on the use table in the T4, T5, and T6 districts. So we removed apartment building from all 3 of those districts and the 2 words from the table. We've added in the 2 definitions that I talked about, the multifamily building mixed use and the multifamily building single use. The difference between these 2 building types is that multifamily building mixed use is allowed by right only in the T5 and T6 districts. It's not allowed in the T4 district anymore. And that multifamily building single use is allowed by warrant in the T5 and T6 districts. It is also no longer allowed in the T4 districts. So just to clarify, we have removed multifamily buildings as a use within the T4 and T5 districts. And we further defined, we've removed it as a by right use and a use at all within the T4 district, and then separated it by warrant and by right in the T5 districts based on mixed use and single use. And then further, we've defined within the building function section of the Division 3 use standards that a multifamily development standalone single use shall not be permitted within the smart code districts. So that removes the ability to create and propose projects for multifamily development that is standalone single use within the smart code district. So getting back to that resolution. At the subcommittee and smart code review committee, questions were proposed about the other residential types, specifically duplex, row house, and townhouse. In going back and looking at those definitions, the row house and townhouses were defined as single-family uses, so there was no issue in being confused within the multifamily building type, residential type. However, a duplex, as you can see, was previously defined, or is currently defined within our code as a multifamily building. So the proposal tonight to clarify that is that a duplex is a two-family building, going back to the definition of a duplex. And we've stricken out the words multifamily applies to a building with 2 or more housing units that share 1 or more common walls, going back again to the alignment with the definition in the regular portion of the zoning code that a multifamily dwelling is defined as a building with 3 or more types, and how we've changed that within the definition of multifamily building. With that, since I am at the conclusion of my presentation, I'm happy to answer any questions by the board.
Commissioners, questions? Alderman.
So, Cameron, just want to make sure I have a handle on this and understanding on this. Regarding multifamily zoning, we currently in the city of Germantown do not have any open land or land available for development that is zoned multifamily. Is that correct?
The RT, or residential townhouse zoning designation within the regular zoning code, is fully built upon at this point. That does not preclude, God forbid, a natural disaster coming in and wiping that out and allowing it to be redeveloped. But there is no open land with a RT zoning designation on top of it.
Okay. Nor do I believe there's any desire whatsoever to rezone any property to that, so that's good. And so this would take out standalone, single-use apartments in the only land that we have available left for apartments, or multifamily, as it were, as you define it, in the smart growth district. Am I correct in that as well?
Yes, sir. So the multifamily development, standalone single use, as we propose the definition, is the building or group of buildings with 3 or more that is built solely for residential purposes. So it's not included within a mixed-use development. It's not integrated into that building plan, that project plan, rather. It's just a project that is only multifamily buildings or a building.
Okay.
I don't know, I'll just make a suggestion. To make that absolutely clear, you might point to the, below the use table, item B, that says it plainly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Harris. B, within the use table, we wanted to just be clear. Multifamily development, standalone single use, shall not be permitted in the smart code districts.
And just to be clear, there are no other areas zoned currently, as you said a minute ago, in a manner that would permit multifamily development standalone single use.
Yes, Mr. Marsh, that is correct.
Okay.
And Mr. Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, that same definition would apply irrespective of whether that standalone single-use multifamily development were for sale or for rent,
Yes, sir.
commonly referred to as a condominium versus an apartment.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Ross. I have got to acknowledge you and your staff have done an excellent job. For the last 6 months, I guess we've had 3 or 4 meetings on this topic and a lot of discussion and iterations and a lot of research by your staff, and I'd just like to commend you for all the hard work that y'all have done on this. I think we now move to see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project. Please come forward. Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Please come forward. Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, the subcommittee met on October 23rd, 2019, and recommended that the application move forward to the November Planning Commission meeting with modifications discussed at the meeting. Tonight's proposed motion is approval of the amendments to the Smart Code sections 23-763.A and B, 23-745, and 23-819 of the zoning ordinance. And in addition, as we discussed in the executive session earlier on page 7, the multifamily development standalone single use, Commissioner Marsh had an excellent addition to this, and it would read as listed: a building or a group of buildings with 3 or more housing units that share one or more common walls and that is built solely for residential purposes, and then the addition to that language, and not built as a component of an integrated mixed-use development. So that would be added to that text.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any questions, comments before we call for the vote?
Chairman, I'd like to make a brief comment. One of the things over the past 6 months that I think pointed a lot of my understanding of this is that the excellent work that the various departments put together in regard to how our infrastructure, our streets, our public service, also our first responders, I think that gave me a very good understanding of how our city would be served if we did go forward with this, and I think it, brought a lot of light to that situation. And I'd like to commend them on the fact of all the hard work they put together.
I agree, Commissioner. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting to approve. As Commissioner Saunders mentioned, we've had, at the direction of the BMA, we've had 2 workshops and a subcommittee meeting. I'd like to say that when Mr. Ross says we is a collective term. There were a lot of people involved with crafting these text amendments. I think the basis of our initial review was a pretty exhaustive study that the city prepared relative to this whole apartment issue. It's about 3 or 4 inches of paper. It was presented a couple of times publicly. I believe it's still available for review. But particularly the first work session, we had representatives of all the first responders, all of the city divisions, a tremendous amount of information and input from a lot of people. And I think that this speaks to some pretty clear results of that. And I think the most notable, obviously, is the elimination of the standalone apartments. So I'm voting to approve.
Mr. Clark?
Yes, I'm going to echo what my fellow commissioner said. they've mentioned a couple meetings that we had, workshops that we had, but the large binder of information was just very eye-opening to what the city provides for its citizens, and also the impact that it has, that these apartment or these multifamily units would have on our city. So after reviewing that and just seeing the minimal impact it would have on there, I'm going to vote in favor of this as well.
Mr. Hernandez.
I'm also going to be voting, excuse me, in favor. And I will also say that, after a thorough review of the apartment moratorium study and all the objective data and analytics that went into that study, and then you couple that with the presentations from each of the different respective departments, I must say this study, and I think it was 340 pages, I'm not sure of the measurements and thickness, but I think Mr. Bacon is about correct. It was one of the most comprehensive analyses that I have seen in my tenure as a planning commissioner. So I too want to thank all the departments and the staff and Mr. Mayor and his administration for every effort that went into that. And my conclusion is that the impact on city services and the infrastructure with these changes will be reasonable. They can be accommodated within the existing capital improvement plans and those that are under development in future years. And so therefore I'm voting in favor of the proposed ordinance change.
Mr. Marsh.
Likewise, in terms of the breadth and comprehensive nature of the work that was done, I'll also reference the GMSD in terms of the load on our school district. One of the more informative reports I've ever seen in terms of not only our existing and prospective capacity, but the detail of data that was put forward based on expectations and demographic study in regard to the need for spaces in our school system, the number of open seats we have today, the amount of capacity, how that's managed. Really a very, very thorough and detailed analysis, as well as the information regarding the impact of multifamily of various types on our school systems, in addition to public safety, infrastructure, and the other things that we've all discussed. Add my commendation to staff, a tremendous amount of, I would presume, certainly hundreds if not thousands of hours of time and effort, but also the engagement of objective third parties and validation of data outside of just our own team, and assuring that what they thought they saw and what they understood to be the case and observed in our own city and our previous experience was consistent with standards across other communities similar to ours as far as actual experience is concerned. So that helped tremendously, and I agree. I think these changes are going to be good and consistent with the outcome of those reports and of the information and study that was provided. So I'm voting yes.
Alderman Owens.
I'll echo what everyone here has said. I appreciate the work that's gone into moratorium study and enlightening the Planning Commission on that. I think this amendment addresses, as Mr. Ross stated previously, the 3 of the 4, at least, provisions that were requested by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And I understand from him that the 3rd provision, in which we establish smart growth design guidelines to minimize the impact on city services, and I won't go on to read the whole thing, but I think that is coming before us in a work session over the next month or 2, and so we will have met the full intent of that resolution. And so I vote yes.
Mr. Saunders.
I echo my commissioner's statements. One thing I'd like to say that I've been involved with the smart growth ever since it started out with charrettes and with the various meetings across the city. I think one of the things that we really look forward to this smart growth was to have the integration of residential units within the mixed use, and that it was there to provide what is now becoming a somewhat of a demand of the, lack of a better term, multifamily participants in it is to be live, work, and play. And I think that's one of the things that we're starting to achieve here with some of this. I thoroughly agree with everyone in regard when we start talking about the garden type apartments, which is what we've seen over the past years in regard to what we have around. So I really think this is a great start on it, and I think the definitions are well defined, so it gives us the necessary leadership in regard to being able to determine if what comes before us meets those criteria, and I'll be voting yes.
Chairman Harless.
I'll also second my commissioner's comments. I would add that this commission is made up of volunteers, and the time that these people have put in on this project, in addition to the staff, is tremendous. A lot of meetings, a lot of research, a lot of study, a lot of questions and comments, and I think at the end of the day, we've come up with a pretty good product. I vote yes.
Mayor Palazzola.
Abstain. And Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to personally thank the Planning Commission for your thoughtful, diligent, and very constructive work. I'd also like to thank staff for many, many hours of guidance and assistance with your work. And of course, I'd like to thank our apartment moratorium team, a very much a cross-functional grouping of first responders, people from GMSD, staff, our athletic club director as well. It was a really cross-section of folks that worked on this. The final analysis is we want to get it right, and I think we're on the right track. So thank you for your work tonight.
And with that, this project moves forward to the BMA. We now move to case number 18834, Care For. Do we have a staff presentation?
Thank you, Chairman Harless. In front of you is item 5B is Care For at the Gateway. The request is the approval of a revised outline plan for a mixed-use development to add residential use. Just to get us started, the property originally was zoned shopping center and commercial district C2. It was rezoned to T5 and T6 as part of the Germantown West Gateway Small Area Plan in November of 2014. The original outline plan, along with one warrant to allow for civic space for a multifamily development consisting of 434,000 square feet of office, 104,000 square feet of retail, 240 hotel rooms, was approved on this site by the Planning Commission in October of 2018, so just over a year ago, and by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen in November, end of November of 2018. The applicant is now seeking to amend the previously approved outline plan following Section 23579 of the Municipal Code to allow for the residential uses to be considered. The current plan is to revise the proposed uses to allow for the addition of approximately 320 multifamily units as a concepted permitted use within the boundaries of this project. As the code, as we've talked about in the previous item, T5 and T6 districts allow for a mix of uses that include residential, retail, commercial, and office. Within the T5 district, 5-story buildings are allowed by right, and a request can be made to both the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to have consideration for a 6-story. Within the T6 district, 8 stories are allowed by right, and a warrant can be requested to the Planning Commission and to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for consideration of up to 10 stories. On Poplar Avenue, buildings must be placed a minimum of 10 feet back from the right-of-way and a maximum of 40 feet.
These conditions are all reflected on the outline plan that's in front of you this evening. The final plan for each phase of the development, which is outlined in your packet and shown here on the proposed phasing plan, would require review individually for approval by the Planning Commission. So again, those final plans for each of these phases, Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3, will have to come back to the Planning Commission for consideration, starting with the Smart Code Review Committee and going through the process that other Smart Code projects have gone to, that will provide specific details on the building and site standards, that will also include architectural standards relative to the Smart Code regulations. The revision to their plan also includes a reduction in the office square footage, a slight reduction in the retail square footage, a reduction in the hotel rooms, and the parking space remains approximately the same. Again, these are all conceptually proposed maximum square footages that are being put forward as part of their outline plan request in accordance with the guidelines set forth in the ordinance. The applicant is here to discuss this in further detail if the commission would like to hear from them. Just to conclude staff's presentation, when we look at this in terms of the compatibility with our planning documents approved by both the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and this Planning Commission, this aligns with the Germantown Forward 2030 strategic objectives within the economic development section of that plan, following policies that encourage investment in our key commercial areas. This falls within the West Gateway, which is one of our 5 key commercial areas as part of the Forward 2030 plan. This also is in alignment with the assessed property values in designated smart growth areas increases annually, and it is staff's belief, going with the analysis that's been provided as part of this application, that this will meet this. This also is in alignment with the previously referenced 2013 Germantown Small Area Plan for the Western Gateway. This project is within that area. The regulating plan for this area emphasized a mix of land uses that included residential. That was part of the analysis that was done as part of that charrette and design workshop that was conducted with the community in this area. As far as the alignment with the Germantown zoning ordinances, as it has been amended tonight, this outline plan does conform to the use regulations within the 2 T5 and T6 districts. The warrant has already been approved, and that will move forward with this amended outline plan for the inclusion of the civic space that can be seen in these renderings. This is part of it, and the applicant has a brief presentation that they can talk more about their programming. And to close, just as extra emphasis, each final plan brought forward for review will also need to adhere to the Smart Code regulations that are governing this site, that will be set forward with the approval of this outline plan by the Planning Commission tonight, if they so deem approval, and be considered by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen as part of an amendment to the outline plan if the Planning Commission does vote in affirmative fashion tonight.
Mr. Ross, thank you for your presentation. Commissioners, any questions of staff? If not, would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a quick question. Just, Mr. Ross, just for the record, with this application, there are no additional warrants being requested. The only warrant currently that is included with this application is the previously approved warrant for the civic space.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then just one quick other question, just for the record. The phasing plan or the outline plan that we were reviewing, the interior drive, that is generally or at the location that was contemplated with the small area plan. There's been no
That is correct.
changes to that traffic flow as originally contemplated with the plan.
Yes, sir, and no real changes to that from the previously approved outline plan.
And then one last question. The uses that were identified at the time the small area plan was adopted did contemplate residential.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, if you will, state your name and address for the record, please.
Nelson Cannon, Austin Cannon, 6685 Poplar Avenue, Suite 200, Germantown, Tennessee, 38138. Back again, excited to be here again. About this time last year, we were here. We were here last year with a plan consisting of office, hotel, retail, restaurant uses for the Care 4 at Kirby Woods Mall. I'd like to take a moment to discuss. Mr. Ross did a pretty good job of showing the difference in the two plans. Like a retail staying about the same. Office is being reduced by about 110,000 square feet. The hotel is being reduced by about 66 keys, but we're adding 320 residential units. The addition of this use will meet some of the comments we got during last year's outline plan. With that, I'd like to ask Doug with Kimley Horn, he's our traffic engineer, to discuss traffic.
Good evening, Doug Sweat with Kimley Horn and Associates, 6750 Poplar Avenue, Suite 600, Memphis, Tennessee, 38138. And just real quickly, Kimley Horn performed a traffic study several years ago for the city of Germantown in related to the Western Gateway area study. So what we did with that study was we looked at the properties within this corridor. If you go back to the first map, it showed Care 4, it showed Fountain Square, Westminster, the area all along there, the redevelopment of all those individual properties with this, the different uses that we assumed as a part of that study, also by zoning code and by use right in those areas as well. That is shown on the left column of this table that's shown before you. The Western Gateway study, Care 4 property, proposed density showed 315 dwelling units. So to your point, there were 315 dwelling units in the Western Gateway study. There were 175,000 square feet of retail restaurant, 140,000 square feet of office, some hotel, and it generated a total amount of trips of 15,842. You do get some interaction of the different uses on site. Then once you take account for those reductions, total new trips were 10,570. The middle column is what was previously approved last year. For Care 4, which you show the no residential, showed the higher amount of office and the 240 rooms of hotel. The trip generation from that was 13,528. In the total trips, once you take the reduction of the interaction between the uses, it was 11,600. So it was a slight increase from the Western Gateway study. The final column on the right is what is being proposed tonight in the new uses. That it shows the 320 residential units, the essentially stay equal on the retail and restaurant, the lowering of office, reduction in office, and the reduction in hotel. What you'll see is this is actually a reduction in trips from the previous application a year ago. So while we add the residential and reduce the office, you actually see a reduction in the traffic from the previously approved group of uses. So it's about a 4% increase over the Western Gateway study. It's about 442 trip increase. So again, that's a fairly slight increase from the Western Gateway study. As a part of that Western Gateway study, we did also identify what public improvements would be needed to accommodate the additional traffic generated by all the properties in this area. And that was, we did identify a widening on Poplar that would allow for a right turn lane from Poplar on to Kirby. It did identify some improvements on Kirby as well, and then traffic signals at the entrance on Kirby, and a traffic signal at the entrance on Poplar, that westernmost entrance on Poplar, and then the center entrance on Kirby. We had traffic signals identified. As a part of their development, they will widen Poplar to provide for that right turn lane onto Kirby. They will install those 2 traffic signals, and then they'll also dedicate right-of-way along Kirby for the future improvements along Kirby that were identified as part of that study. So I'll be glad to answer any other questions regarding the traffic generated by the development, as well as any operational or traffic circulation access questions that y'all may have. So,
Question, when would the signals go in place, and when would the widening of Poplar take place?
so all of the public improvements would be included as a part of Phase 1 of the development.
And the timing on Phase 1 is?
You know, I'd like to say be in here next year, at the end of next year with the final.
Other questions?
Just, Mr. Chairman, just a couple. So from the time that the Western Gateway study, and when was that prepared? Was that five years ago?
2016? 2016.
3 years ago. Oh, so from the time that was prepared to the current proposed program and plan, it's the trips have just incrementally increased. I mean, to the 2019, it's less than 500 trips.
So you're speaking to the increase from 10,570 to 11,012?
Right.
Yeah, so it's a
It's just
442 trip increase.
Incremental increase.
Mhm. And some of that is, you can see in the Western Gateway study, the reduction of 15,842 down to 10,570 because of the interactions. That's about a 33% decrease. We didn't dive into those numbers in the Western Gateway study and look into those reductions that you get in the interaction between residential and office. As we did this one, we really tightened that down and get more conservative on what those reductions are going to be. And so that you see a little bit of an increase in that total net trips.
Would you just explain that in a little bit more detail,
So-
particularly the pass-by reduction?
Yeah, so to your point, I think one of y'all mentioned the live, stay, play, all in that one development. So you have the opportunity to be able to live in the development, work in the development, and so that is the opportunity for somebody to do that, as opposed to somebody living in the development, coming in and out in the morning and evening to go to work. They can stay on site and go to work. And so we don't typically expect there to be a large percentage of that, but there is going to be a percentage of people that take the opportunity to live, work in that same development, or stay and work, or visit a retail restaurant, at the same time as live in that or work in that same development. So you get that overlap of use within the site, and you can reduce the amount of trips that's actually being generated.
And then one other traffic question. Will the signalization, does it change when there's a train coming through? I mean, obviously that stretch of Kirby can stack up dramatically at rush hour with the train.
Correct.
And the trains come through at 5 o'clock. I mean, so what happens to the signalization, in particular with a new signal on Kirby? Is it modified at all when a train comes through?
So the one on the south side it's directly connected to it. I believe we are outside of the range of it actually required to be interconnected with the railroad, with the new signal, correct. The new one would be outside of that range. There are some things we can do from a traffic standpoint and a technology standpoint to help potentially identify when those issues would occur if there were queuing back up and such, but it would not be directly connected to the railroad.
Thanks for the questions. Commissioners, other questions of the applicant?
Well, in terms of the traffic flow, at some point, I think there have been or are in some areas integration of signaling through fiber systems that communicate between the signals during certain times of day, like rush hour and so forth. I mean, has that been reviewed, or is that a part of the thought process and planning for the project?
So there is currently fiber that runs up and down Poplar, interconnecting all the signals along Poplar. There is also fiber that's been recently installed in the last couple of years along Kirby that connects Poplar Pike to Poplar, and then also all the way up to Quail Hollow and Cottingham. And so all of those signals are already connected. When these signals get installed, they will actually be directly connected into that fiber. So when they're designed, they will be designed to help be communicating into the network and communicating with signals adjacent to it.
So that permits integration of signaling to address particular traffic flow issues in different times of day.
Correct. It'll help with the progression through each of these corridors, right?
Thank you.
Just one other question. So what was there, because it just made me start thinking about a light on Poplar, was there any, just out of curiosity, was there any discussion relative to aligning the driveways with the shopping center to the north? And if there's, I mean, it obviously is a dramatic change to the master plan, or whatever would end up being the final interior circulation plan.
So there are options for what you could do, but however, I think if you further align, and I know James had some to deal with it, so if he wants to add to this, he can. But I think if you shift it over, you're going to have more traffic accessing that light. The way we have it right now, you have the opportunity to have less time on your side street. If you shift that over and align it, I think you're going to run into some issues. You also shift it closer to the intersection of Kirby. So you're shifting it closer, which could create spacing issues for the signals. But it also would create additional traffic using that signal, which would require more time on the side street, less time for Poplar, which could create some congestion issues along Poplar.
I understand.
Excuse me, James Collins with Kimley Horn Associates, and I'll just add to that, we did have a discussion with Kroger about trying to redo their driveway in order to be able to make that align with the westernmost property line of this development. And it was before they built the gas station. They thought about it for a while, and they came back and said, no, we're happy with the plan the way that it is, and we don't want to align.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Well, I was just say, following the same line of thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but that exit from Kroger onto Poplar is a right-out only exit, or is it, you can't turn left out of that?
Not the signalized one will be full access. The one further east that's currently right in, right out will remain right in, right out.
Okay, from the Cannon property.
Correct.
But across the street, I guess you can turn left onto
left.
Poplar from the Kroger site.
From the Kroger site, you cannot turn left out. You can turn left in.
Okay.
So it's what we call a three-quarter driveway. You can make a right in, right out, and a left in, but you cannot make a left out.
All right. Thank you.
If there's no other questions?
Real quick, can you show on the site plan where the Poplar Avenue improvement is that you're talking about widening Poplar Avenue? And I know right there at Poplar and Kirby, there's been issues with buses and things of that nature that stage up there.
I'm not getting a click, so.
Oh.
There you go. So on the westernmost edge of the property line, you see where the intersection is with the signal. That one of the, to your point, where the maybe MATA issues were, we've added a crosswalk across Poplar with the signal as well, which will provide a crossing for. I know there are people who get off the bus on the south side and then try to cross Poplar. They'll actually, the protected crossing is for them to walk east all the way to the intersection at Kirby, cross, and then walk all the way back west to the bus stop on the other side of the road, but they're not doing that. You'll actually notice people get off the bus, walk across, stand in the two-way left turn lane in the middle of the road, wait for more gaps, play Frogger, if you will, with the traffic and make their way across. And so with this signal, it actually provides a protected crossing closer to those stops and gives those people an opportunity to have a protected crossing.
So on that, I guess the northern end of the property, that's where the Poplar Avenue improvement is? Yeah, there you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Correct. Yeah, that's where, I'm sorry. The widening of Poplar for the right turn lane onto Kirby is shown right there where the red dot is.
Okay, thank
you. Correct.
Just point out one more thing. Right now, you have that turn lane also that's existing can go straight, which allows more traffic to go down because we widen the street over there at Trevure. But we're adding a turn lane and keeping that 3 lanes going eastbound. So that should help out with the traffic flow, I would think, going through that intersection. But, can't do anything with MATA.
That's correct.
So.
Other questions? Thank you very much. Do we have anyone in the audience? Mr. Cannon, do you have something?
I was going to finish my
Please.
presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm okay. I can stop, but
please.
I mean, I know Doug did such a good job. Some of the highlights of the property that might not be completely obvious to everybody, but we are increasing the pervious surface percentage, keeping 64% of the large caliper trees. Granted, they are mostly our buffer with Fountain Square, but we are keeping 64% of them on the entire site. We're improving pedestrian crossings. Right now, Care 4 has one of the highest walk and bike scores in the city of Germantown. That's how as it sits now. So I would imagine that this is going to make it the highest. Where we are right now serves both Memphis neighborhoods and Germantown neighborhoods. So it's we've been in lots of contact with lots of the neighborhoods. So the phased infill approach, it's going to allow for a better absorption rate, ability to keep existing tenants' doors open while transferring them to new space, and the ability to react to the changing markets. The live, work, play, and we like to say live, work, play, stay with the hotel concept. All these things have to be there. That's why we're coming back in with this residential, is that, when you lack one of these key components, it's just not a complete mixed-use development. So that's why we're back. We'll just go through some perspectives of the property. That's phase one. That's the green area. Office. One of the things that we like to look at is a year-round activities, not just outdoor movies, small music and stuff like that, but more winter also. Where's the clicker? There you go. I just wanted to say in closing that the amended outline plan tonight will allow us to properly market the redevelopment with the entitlements necessary to bring a first-class infill project to Germantown. We believe that we have adhered to the city's vision of 2020 and 2030 plans and done a good job over the years of meeting with neighborhoods and keeping an open and transparent dialogue about our plans and goals. We will continue to keep that relationship as we hope to be back in front of the commission sometime next year with a detailed final plan on phase one and phase two. Thank you.
Mr. Cannon, just a couple of questions. You mentioned meeting with the neighbors. How many meetings have you had?
Since 2018, or just this? Yes. Probably 8 in 2018 and probably another 8 or 9 in 2019.
I commend you for that. I think that's the way to solve a lot of the problems, because if people don't know what's happening, they always envision the worst.
Right,
So,
a lot of misinformation.
Absolutely. Second question, I know you're talking about phases. In phase one, can you tell us what would be in phase one?
Right now, conceptually, it's office, residential, retail, restaurant.
How many multi-family units would be involved in phase one?
Looking at about 100.
About 100.
Mm-hmm.
And then when would the rest of the multifamily units come online?
Conceptually, right now, it's kind of planned for phase three.
And when would phase three be complete?
Complete? 2030, 2026, somewhere in there, that area.
So pretty far down the line?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Other questions for Mr. Cannon?
I just have just a couple, and it's another discussion for another day, but, and I raised this briefly in the subcommittee meeting, but and I just want to raise this for the future, but is a concern about the storefront on Poplar and Kirby.
Right, and, that's like you said, it's down the road a little bit, but, we looked at this as the walk scores are so high. We see people from across the street coming over now for lunch and things like that. So we do expect the storefronts along Poplar and Kirby to have an entrance on the street side as well as the parking.
And a real presence with real doors and.
Yeah, not a fake faux, but
Right.
like I said, that's for a final, and we'll address that.
It's another
then.
discussion for another day. But.
Very good. Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project, please come forward. Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Please come forward. Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, the subcommittee met on October 23rd, 2019, and recommended that the application be placed on the next Planning Commission agenda for action, subject to the subcommittee discussion, comments in the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application. Tonight's proposed motion is the approval of a revised outline plan for the Care 4 at the Gateway PD, subject to the outline plan conditions, general requirements, and TAC comments listed above, and the plans and documents submitted with the application. In addition to that text, we want to add language for item 2A, and that language would be approval of the revised outline plan establishes the maximum square footage and number of residential units, but does not assure approval of the entire maximums in the final plan.
We have a motion,
Second.
and we have a second. Commissioners, any final questions or comments? If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting to approve the application for the outline plan. I think this is a very exciting project. It certainly accomplishes the goals from the standpoint of smart growth and what we're trying to achieve with these types of mixed-use developments, mixed-use environments. Certainly accomplishes the goals as set forth in the Western Gateway plan. And I think just it's a vast improvement over the existing shopping center and the quality of that existing facility. So for this first step in the process, I'm voting to approve.
Mr. Clark?
Again, echo Mr. Bacon's comments. This is the outline plan only with the square footage and the units defined within the application is a maximum number, and it's not to exceed those numbers, so it's just an outline plan. I too like the fact that it's phased out, that it gives it some time to have some absorption in it instead of just all of a sudden hitting the market at one time. And I think that's kind of been one of the concerns of citizens is that they feel that it's going to hit all at one time and it's going to have empty storefronts, and that's not at all what y'all are planning on doing. So I commend you on what you're doing there, and I approve it. I vote yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah, also voting yes, and I think I'd echo the comments of my fellow commissioners.
Mr. Marsh?
Yeah, I'm voting yes, and I would add I've had a number of folks that I've talked with that are pretty excited in the area, and we've gotten a lot of comments from a lot of people in the surrounding area that are very positive. I think this is going to bring a tremendous amount of energy to that area of the city and to the entry into the city. I also think that it is consistent with a lot of the uses along Poplar as well, and although at a very high quality level, and I think that's what we expect in Germantown. So I'm voting yes.
Alderman Owens?
For the reasons that have been stated previously, I vote yes.
Mr. Saunders?
Echo my commissioner's statement, and look forward to the project moving forward, and I'm voting yes.
Chairman Harless?
I've been a longtime resident of Germantown, and I remember when Care 4 was almost the center of Germantown, when we had Barnes & Noble, and we had Macaroni Grill, and we had all these great places that people wanted to be. And I'm looking forward to the day that it gets back to that status. So I think this is a great project for the city, and I commend you. I vote yes.
Mayor Palazzolo?
Yes.
And with that, the motion is approved. Next step is for you to go before the BMA. Thank you for your time. Commissioners, do we have any liaison reports? None. Any old business to come before the commission? Any new business? If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.